In the heart of the Kalahari, where nothing moves but sand and silence, a veteran wildlife photographer stumbled upon a lion. Not roaring, not hunting, just crawling with a rubber tire crushed around its ribs like a noose. Skin and bone, eyes barely open, but still alive. That single glance between man and beast would spark one of the most unforgettable animal rescues ever witnessed. The Kalahari was silent, too silent. Not the kind of quiet that invites peace, but the kind that weighs heavily on the shoulders, like the desert itself is holding its breath. The midday sun scorched the dunes, and the wind carried with it not songs of birds or calls of wild beasts, but only the dry rattle of dust brushing against bone. Alex Pierce, a 42-year-old wildlife photographer from Montana, had been wandering this remote corner of Botswana for 3 days. This wasn't the Kalahari tourists posted on Instagram. No giraffes at watering holes, no proud lions posing on rocks. This was the forgotten stretch of wilderness where the stories no one tells are buried beneath sand and silence. He squinted into the haze, adjusting the dial on his Canon EOS R5. Through the long lens, he scanned a cluster of dried acacia trees clinging stubbornly to life. Then something moved, a slow, dragging movement, barely perceptible. At first, he thought it was a mirage, but the figure staggered again. He brought the lens in tight. His finger froze on the shutter. It was a lion, but not the kind from nature documentaries, not majestic, not regal. This lion was skeletal. Each rib was visible, like chalk lines drawn under skin. Its mane was sparse, matted with dirt and old blood. But what stopped Alex cold wasn't the emaciation. It was the thing wrapped tightly around the lion's torso, a tire, a full-sized rubber truck tire wedged deep around the animal's midsection like a medieval torture device. The lion took another step, then collapsed into the sand. Not dramatically, more like surrender. Alex lowered his camera. His pulse pounded in his ears. He had spent nearly 2 decades photographing lions across Africa, on the Maasai Plains, in the Serengeti, and here in Botswana. He'd seen brutal kills, mothers mourning cubs, even a leopard stealing a newborn calf. But never this. Never a lion living like this. He took a cautious step forward. The lion didn't react. Closer still. Still nothing. Then, as the distance between them shrank to just a few yards, the lion slowly lifted its head. Their eyes met. What stared back at Alex was not wild fury or territorial warning. It was something far worse. Exhaustion. Resignation. A quiet plea. Alex swallowed hard. His instincts screamed to keep a safe distance, but something anchored him to the ground. The lion's breathing was shallow, rattling through its throat like a broken instrument. Flies swarmed around its eyes. The rubber of the tire had fused with the flesh along its sides, patches of fur completely worn away. Around the bottom edge of the tire, the skin was cracked, bruised, and slick with infection. He crouched slowly, whispering, "Easy, big guy. I'm not here to hurt you." The lion didn't move. Alex reached into his pack and pulled out a water bottle. He unscrewed the cap and poured a small stream into the dust. The lion tried to lower its head, but the tire caught, preventing it from bending properly. It whimpered, a low, broken sound that didn't belong to something once feared by all creatures of the plains. Heartbreaking, Alex cupped water in his hand and extended it. The lion hesitated, then flicked its tongue toward the wetness. Just once, then again, a miracle in the Kalahari. Alex pulled out his satellite phone. It took nearly a minute to acquire a signal, but once it did, he punched in the emergency frequency for wildlife rescue services operating out of Ganzi. When a voice finally answered, he relayed the GPS coordinates and described the situation. The woman on the other end didn't speak for several seconds. "You're telling me a lion's been stuck in a tire? Alive?" "Barely alive," Alex said. "You need to send a vet. Now! It'll take at least 90 minutes, she warned. That area's brutal. We have to coordinate the approach. Then coordinate fast, he said. If you wait too long, you're not rescuing a lion. You're collecting a corpse. Alex ended the call and looked back at the lion. It hadn't moved, but its eyes hadn't closed either. He checked his gear and began scanning the horizon. He wasn't worried about being attacked by the lion. He was worried about something worse, the predators who could smell death before it came, hyenas, jackals, even vultures circling above. He poured more water. The lion drank again, this time a little more. And then he saw it, a faint trail in the dust behind the lion, over 100 yards long, the track of a creature that had been dragging itself for what looked like miles. The tire, filled with sand and debris, must have weighed over 40 pounds. Combined with the lion's atrophied body, the effort to move even a few steps must have been unbearable. But it had moved, and that meant it hadn't given up. Alex turned his camera back on, this time not as a photographer chasing a story, but as a witness documenting a tragedy. He zoomed in on the lion's side, taking careful shots of the damage, the embedded rubber, the grotesque way the tire had reshaped the lion's torso. He would need this to show the world, to fund this rescue, to tell the truth. The lion exhaled heavily. Its eyes never left his. "Hang in there," Alex murmured. "Help's coming." A few feet away, the wind began to pick up, blowing dust over their tracks. The sky shimmered in the distance, and the only sound in that vast emptiness was the soft, rhythmic wheezing of a lion fighting to breathe, fighting to live. And a man, just one man, kneeling beside it, refusing to walk away. For Alex, this wasn't about photography anymore. This was about redemption. This was about doing what no one else had done for 2 long years. Stepping in. 2 years earlier, long before the desert had hollowed out his frame and blurred his eyes with dust and pain, the lion had been a different creature altogether. He was in his prime then, young, strong, and revered within his pride. His coat shimmered like golden flame beneath the Botswana sun, and his roar echoed through the acacia trees like thunder bouncing between canyon walls. The other males respected him, and the cubs admired him. But above all, it was the lioness by his side who looked at him as if no one else mattered. She was fierce, sharp-eyed, and fast, a perfect partner in the hunt, a trusted mate when the nights turned cold. They had grown up in the same pride, and their bond was something rare in the brutal balance of the wild. They had no cubs of their own yet, but she was ready. And he was ready to build something lasting in a world where nothing lasted long. That afternoon had been calm. The pride was resting near a dry riverbed, bellies full from a morning kill. Cubs played in the dust while the elders dozed in the shade. The male had wandered a short distance from the others, following the giggles and pounces of the younglings as they chased dragonflies and wrestled in the dirt. That's when he saw it. Something strange, round, and black, half buried in a patch of low scrub brush. It was a tire. Discarded long ago by some vehicle, long since rusted to oblivion, the rubber had stiffened in the sun, dry and cracked, but still whole. The cubs were drawn to it immediately, batting it with their paws, pushing their faces through the empty center like it was a toy made just for them. He watched with amused indifference as one cub got its head stuck and wiggled out with a startled yelp. The others scattered, then came right back to do it again. When the cubs ran off to chase something else, the adult lion approached the object himself. He nudged it with his paw. It rolled. He sniffed. No scent of blood, no threat. Just rubber, dust, and curiosity. And curiosity is a dangerous thing in the wild. He lowered his head and stuck it through the center. In, out. Easy. Again, still easy. Then, because the desert was quiet and his instincts were dulled by comfort, he tried something else. He lifted his paws and leaned forward, pushing his body through the center of the tire as if crawling through a ring. His massive front shoulders passed with resistance, the rubber stretching around him. But when he reached his rib cage, the tension changed. The rubber bit down. The lion panicked. He reared back, roaring as he thrashed, but the tire held firm. The elasticity of the rubber clamped tighter with every struggle. His flailing caused the tire to twist, digging deeper into his flesh. He roared again, louder, more desperate. The birds scattered from the trees. And the pride came running. First his lioness, then others. She saw him stuck, flailing, foam bubbling at his lips, and she lunged at the tire, sinking her teeth into the side. She pulled, hard. So did the others. One bit from the other end. Two used their paws to push. They pulled as if they could tear time backward and undo the mistake. But it didn't move. His cries lasted all night. His mate never left his side. By morning, the tire hadn't budged, but the wounds on his skin had deepened. His pride began to grow restless. The males started pacing. The cubs stopped approaching. The lionesses looked away. And by the third day, things changed. On the savannah, strength isn't just respected, it's required. And weakness? Weakness spreads like disease. One of the older males, with a darker mane and a more calloused face, began to circle the stuck lion. At first with caution, then with aggression, he growled, displayed his teeth, and in a single moment turned from ally to enforcer. The pride leader roared and lunged, not to help, but to banish. The lioness placed herself between them, fangs bared. But the leader was stronger. She knew that. They all knew that. And in the end, she stepped back. That day, the lion was left behind. He didn't roar. He didn't move. He simply watched them vanish into the waves of heat. And when they were gone, when even his mate had no choice but to follow or die herself, he turned away from the pride and toward a life of silent endurance. The tire had become part of him now. His ribs tried to grow outward, but the rubber choked them inward. His fur wore away where it rubbed, his flesh blistered, and still the tire held tight. He could no longer run. He could barely walk. Hunting? Impossible. He scavenged where he could, following the trails of vultures and hyenas, hoping for scraps left behind. The few times he tried to pounce, the pain overwhelmed him. Breathing itself felt like punishment. Sleep came in minutes, never hours. The tire lifted his torso off the ground at night, twisting his neck into cruel angles. Weeks became months. Dry season came. Then wet, then dry again. And still, the tire would not let go. The lion stopped tracking time. He moved only when hunger threatened to kill him, drank only when he stumbled across shallow puddles left by rain. He became a ghost, a whisper of what had once ruled these lands. Locals started seeing him in the distance. A man on a motorbike spotted him near a burned tree line and sped off in fear. A herder said his goats ran from the scent of something wrong, something already dead. No one came closer, no one helped, and no one could have imagined he would still be alive. But nature is strange. Sometimes the will to live is stronger than logic, stronger than pain, stronger than time itself. 2 years passed, and yet this creature, the lion wrapped in a man-made noose, still crawled through the dust like something refusing to disappear. Not dead, not yet. And then, one day, a child stepped into his path. Her name was Naya. She was 9 years old, barefoot, brave, and more curious than cautious. She had wandered from her village, searching for a wounded antelope calf she'd seen the day before limping through the thorn bushes. She carried a hollowed gourd of water and a slingshot, and when she saw the lion, she didn't scream. She didn't run. She stared. So did he. And in that strange, silent meeting between beast and girl, two beings who had no language for one another, something passed between them, something simple. Recognition. The lion lowered his head. The girl stepped forward. She poured a little water into the sand, tilted her gourd, and let a few drops splash over the lion's mouth. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Kalahari, something shifted. A story that had been written in silence was about to change. Because now, finally, someone had seen him, and someone cared. The tire had not just wrapped around the lion's body, it had rewritten it. Day by day, the pressure warped his spine and compressed his chest. The rubber forced his ribs inward, preventing them from expanding fully. Breathing turned shallow and sharp, a stabbing motion with every inhale. As he grew, his bones contorted to make room for the tire. It didn't loosen. It didn't stretch. It simply held on, like a parasite too stubborn to let go. At night, sleep was no relief. The tire elevated his torso off the ground, so his head lay bent at awkward angles. Sometimes he'd wake with one eye swollen shut, unable to move without pain. His once proud mane had thinned, matted with dried blood and scabs. Parasites thrived in the raw skin where the rubber dug deepest. His tail dragged behind him like something forgotten. He no longer hunted. The act of chasing, even lifting his paws into a run, was impossible. He had tried in the early months, lunging at an injured kudu. He collapsed after 2 strides, gasping, vomiting bile into the sand. From that day forward, he stopped trying. The Kalahari was cruel but predictable. The vultures came when something died. The hyenas followed. And the scraps they left behind, the half-picked bones, the bloodless flesh, became his diet. It was survival without dignity, and still, he survived. In places like the Kalahari, survival stories aren't told because they're beautiful. They're told because they're brutal. And this lion's story was as brutal as they came. His territory shrank to a narrow radius, maybe a few miles across. He knew where the lowlands pooled water during the rainy season. He knew which termite mounds collapsed first in drought, exposing roots still clinging to moisture. But more than anything, he learned how to vanish. To avoid other lions. To avoid man. To avoid death without actually dying. Some nights he would stand perfectly still and stare toward the dunes where the pride had once lived. The wind sometimes carried faint echoes, roars, snarls, calls of young cubs. He didn't respond. He couldn't. His voice had grown hoarse from disuse. But he listened every night. Sometimes he dreamed of her, his lioness. In his mind, she was always the same, coat clean, eyes sharp, walking beside him under the early evening sun. In those dreams, there was no tire, no pain, no hunger. Just wind and silence and warmth. And then he'd wake up, body twisted, mouth dry, surrounded by buzzing flies and the stench of infection. He stopped dreaming eventually. One morning, after a night of cold wind and shallow sleep, he tried to stand and failed. The tire had filled with sand again, heavy, wet sand from the brief rainfall the night before. When he finally rose, it was like dragging a boulder from his chest. He stumbled forward, fell, stood again. He kept going. Somewhere deep inside him, something primitive still burned, a code written into his blood. Lions don't quit, even when there's nothing left to fight for. It wasn't instinct anymore. It wasn't hope. It was just motion. On day 680, almost 2 full years since the tire had claimed his body, he smelled something unfamiliar. Not prey, not predator. Something sweet, something human. He followed it. That scent led him near a grove of thorn trees where he collapsed in the shade. There was no plan, no destination, just the quiet wish to feel less alone. That's when the child arrived. Naya, small, barefoot, face half covered with the red dust of the road. She carried water in a gourd carved from a baobab fruit and wore a necklace of beads strung by her grandmother. She had no fear in her, only curiosity. She should have been afraid. But the lion didn't move. His eyes opened, but his body remained still. And that stillness, so complete, so unnatural, spoke to her more than any roar. She poured a little water into her hands and held it out. It spilled through her fingers, wetting the dust. The lion didn't drink. He only watched, but something in his gaze flickered. Recognition? No, something older, a memory of kindness, of gentle things. She tried again. This time the lion's tongue reached forward, one slow lap, then another. And for the first time in months, his breathing eased. From a distance, Alex had been watching. He had spotted Nia through the lens, at first concerned, then confused. When he saw the lion, he froze. His instinct screamed for him to run, to pull the child away, to make noise, fire a warning shot, anything. But nothing happened. No lunging, no growling, just quiet. The kind of quiet that demands respect. He waited until Nia stepped back and the lion closed his eyes. Then he slowly approached. When she saw him, she smiled, proud but tired. "He's thirsty," she said. Alex crouched down beside the lion, eyeing the tire. Up close, the damage was worse than he'd imagined. This wasn't just constriction, it was destruction. The rubber had become part of the lion's anatomy, pressing into muscle, skin, and bone. The fur had receded entirely around the band, replaced by lesions and rot. "Where did he come from?" Alex asked gently. "He's always been around," Nia said. "He doesn't chase us, just watches. Mama says he's a spirit." Alex knew better. This wasn't a ghost. This was a survivor. He called it in, again, this time with full details. The team at the Botswana Wildlife Rescue Authority recognized his voice immediately. He'd worked with them years ago on an anti-poaching campaign. They promised to mobilize fast, but fast wasn't fast enough. The Kalahari had its own clocks. As Alex sat beside the lion offering water in his palm, he noticed the vultures circling above. Then came the distant howls. Hyenas. And they were coming closer. The lion's ears twitched. Even now, weakened and wrecked, his instincts remained intact. His eyes opened, his nose twitched, his body stiffened. Alex looked around. Nowhere to hide, no cover, no weapons, just him, the child, and a lion who could barely stand. The wind shifted. The scent of blood, old, thick, and sick, hung in the air like a flag, a beacon for every scavenger for miles. Alex clenched his fists. He had stepped in. Now he had to stand his ground. The wind changed first, just a small shift, a subtle curl in the air that carried a scent neither human nor lion could ignore. Rot, hunger, teeth. Alex felt it before he heard it, the way the silence tensed like a drumskin pulled taut, waiting to snap. Then came the sound, thin and cruel, a high-pitched chattering that rose and fell with glee. Hyenas? At least a half dozen, maybe more, and they were close. Nia's eyes widened. She didn't scream. She only looked at Alex. He didn't hesitate. He scooped her up and backed against the nearest termite mound, using the slope as cover. His breath was shallow, his mind spinning through options. He had no rifle, no flare, no backup. The only weapon he had was in his backpack, a camera drone with a built-in speaker and a small emergency flash beacon used to signal rescue planes. It would have to be enough. The lion raised his head slowly. His breathing was labored, but his ears were alert now, twitching toward the sound. His body trembled, but there was still something alive in those eyes, a flicker of fight buried deep under pain and dust. The first hyena appeared between two thorn bushes, its spotted coat blending almost perfectly with the Kalahari sand. Then another, and another. They moved like smoke, low to the ground, grinning with mouths that never closed fully. Eyes bright, full of anticipation. They had smelled the wound, the weakness. They didn't rush. Hyenas never did when they knew they had the advantage. They stalked in a wide arc, surrounding without encircling. Alex kept one hand on Nia's back, the other fumbling through his gear. The drone was still intact, battery at 63%. He switched it on, wincing as it chirped to life. Then he launched it. The device buzzed upward, unsteady at first in the crosswind, then stable as Alex took control. He flew it directly toward the hyenas, low and aggressive. The speaker blared out a high-pitched whistle, followed by bursts of white noise. The predators jerked their heads up, startled. The drone zipped between them, spinning sharply, its propellers slicing the air. One hyena snapped at it, teeth grazing the plastic. Alex pulled it away just in time and flared the emergency light. A sharp red beam flashed in strobe bursts, sweeping across their eyes. The hyenas retreated a few feet, confused, but they didn't leave. Alex pushed harder. He dipped the drone lower and triggered the emergency speaker's test siren. The sound was shrill, painful even to human ears. The lead hyena flinched, ears flat, and turned in a tight circle, clearly rattled. But the rest held their line. They were smart, and they were patient, and they knew this lion couldn't run. Alex's heart slammed in his chest. The drone wasn't going to be enough. He landed it behind the mound and kept Naya close. The girl had stopped trembling. Her hand clung to his shirt, but her eyes remained fixed on the lion. The lion was trying to stand. His front legs straightened, wobbling under the weight of his body and the sand-heavy tire. His hind legs shook, but held. He rose slowly, the rubber frame rising with him like a parasite fused to his frame. He stumbled once, recovered, and took a single step forward, then another. He moved in front of Alex and Naya, placing himself between them and the circling predators. Alex stared, stunned. This creature, beaten, crushed, barely alive, was still willing to fight. For them. The hyenas felt the shift. They paused. And for one brief moment, predator looked into the eyes of predator, and something passed between them. Not fear, not dominance, but memory. This lion had once been a killer. They could smell it in his bones. But time had dulled his teeth, and pain had dulled his pace. Still the hyenas hesitated. Then one made the choice. A charge. Quick and low, aiming not at the lion, but at the humans behind him. The lion roared. It wasn't loud. It wasn't strong. But it was real. He leapt, not far, not fast, but enough. His front paw slammed into the dust, cutting off the hyena's approach. The hyena yelped and veered away, retreating behind the line. The others snarled, unsure. Their circle tightened again. The lion stood firm, panting now, sweat and blood seeping from under the tire. And then came the rumble, distant, rhythmic, mechanical, a vehicle. Alex heard it before the hyenas did. He grabbed Naya's hand. "Rescue," he whispered. Out past the dune, a small black speck grew rapidly. A jeep barreling over the sand, tires kicking up dust like smoke. The hyenas turned their heads. Confusion, then alarm. Then, one by one, they backed away. By the time the jeep roared into the clearing, the predators had vanished into the scrub. The vehicle skidded to a stop. Two men jumped out first, wielding tranquilizer guns. A woman followed, tall, African, hair tied back, eyes sharp behind dust-tinted sunglasses. She carried a medical pack on one shoulder. Dr. Sarah Matsamai, veterinary surgeon, wildlife trauma expert, and one of the best emergency responders in southern Africa. Alex exhaled hard. "You cut it close," he said. She didn't smile. "We always do." She knelt beside the lion. Her hand hovered over his side, near the tire, then moved gently to his chest. She listened. Her face darkened. "Heart slow, very slow, and his body temperature's dropped," she said. Alex nodded. "He's been carrying that thing for 2 years." She looked at him. 2 years? He showed her the photos, the skin lesions, the worn marks, the deformity in his spine. She didn't speak again, just pulled out a syringe and gave a tiny dose of sedative, enough to dull the pain, but not enough to stop his heart. Her team unpacked tools. Alex stepped back, still holding Naya, who watched with wide eyes. "They're going to help him now?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, but it won't be easy." Nia didn't blink. She only whispered, "He's not just a lion." Alex looked down at her. "No," he said quietly. "He's not. He was something more, something no one had helped for 2 years, until a child brought him water, until a man brought him help. And now, maybe, he had a chance to live again." The sedative was weak by design, just enough to dull the lion's pain, not enough to stop him from breathing. Anything stronger would have sent his heart into shock. That was the line they had to walk, just a whisper between mercy and risk. Dr. Sarah slipped on thick gloves and gently touched the edge of the tire. It didn't move. Years of heat had hardened the rubber. She tapped it with her knuckles and felt the vibration through her hand. Inside, the tire wasn't empty. It was packed. Soil, old bones, fragments of acacia thorns, dry dung, even small stones. 2 full years of the desert had filled it with everything except relief. Alex stood just a few feet away, holding Nia close. The little girl was silent, her eyes fixed on the lion's side. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She simply watched, as if witnessing something sacred. The 2 rescue team members unpacked tools, tongs, a small flat shovel, a syringe of sterile lubricant, and a battery-powered saw with a diamond blade. They worked quickly but carefully, like men who knew they had no margin for error. "Start by digging it out," Sarah said softly. "We have to reduce the weight before we try to shift it." For the next 15 minutes, the team took turns scooping out hardened debris. With each handful removed, the air filled with a bitter, rotting smell, a mixture of dried blood, waste, and decay. At one point, a small clump of old maggots slid free. Naya turned her face into Alex's chest, but didn't look away for long. As the weight inside the tire reduced, Sarah found a small opening near the top edge. She inserted the syringe and pushed in the lubricant, working it into the narrow space between the rubber and the lion's torn flesh. The lion's muscles twitched at the contact, but he didn't roar. He didn't move much at all now. "He's near collapse," Sarah said, more to herself than anyone. "This has to happen now." The tire was still locked around his ribs like a vice. The team counted to 3, and all 4, Sarah, the 2 men, and Alex, gripped and pulled together. The tire shifted a few inches. Hope, then it stuck again. "Wait," Sarah warned. "That's the widest point of his ribs. If we force it now, they could snap." They let go. A long silence followed. "He's going to die if we wait too long," Alex said. Sarah nodded. Her voice was firm, but her hands trembled. "We're cutting it." The saw whined to life, sharp and shrill. One of the men braced the lion's head, steadying it with his forearm. The other shielded the lion's flank with a thick tarp. Sparks flew as the blade kissed steel. Inside the rubber, hidden wires, used for structural support, fought back. The tire wasn't just rubber. It was reinforced. The lion flinched, claws twitching. The blade stopped. Sarah pulled back, checked his eyes. They were open, glazed, but still there. "He's aware," she whispered. Alex stepped forward without thinking. "Let me hold him." "You sure?" one rescuer asked. "No," Alex replied, "but I'm here." He crouched beside the lion and gently cradled its massive head in his arms. The lion's breath was hot against his forearm, its jaw opened slightly, revealing dull, cracked teeth. This animal had once ended lives in a single bite. Now it could barely lift its head. Sarah returned to the blade. This time the cut went deeper. Sparks flared again, bouncing off the tarp. The lion growled low, a sound from somewhere deep in its chest, not angry, just exhausted. The first cut broke through. The tire flexed slightly, one side down. The second cut took longer. The blade dulled quickly, forcing a switch. As Sarah carved the final edge, the tension in the rubber released with a faint snap. And then the tire dropped. A hush fell over them. The lion didn't move. The team stared at the exposed flesh. It was worse than any of them had expected. The skin beneath the tire was dead, gray, cracked, and oozing. In some places, muscle had been exposed. The bones of his ribs bore indentations where the tire had compressed them for so long. It looked less like an animal and more like something sculpted from suffering. Sarah moved quickly. She doused the wound with disinfectant, wincing as it bubbled. She injected antibiotics into both back legs and started an IV with saline. One of the men began applying a thick ointment with gloved hands. They didn't speak. There was no need. Alex stepped back, his hands shaking, blood staining his sleeves. Nia stood beside him now, small and quiet. "He's free," she said. Alex nodded, blinking back something he couldn't quite name. "He is." For a few long minutes the lion lay still. Then a paw twitched, another breath, and then, slowly, impossibly, he rolled to one side and pushed himself up. He stood, not straight, not proud, but he stood. For the first time in over 700 days, the lion stood on all four legs without being strangled by rubber. Nia clapped once, then caught herself. The lion turned slightly, his eyes scanning the space around him. He looked toward Alex, then toward the horizon, then up, and then from somewhere out beyond the scrub, a sound returned. Hyenas? Again. Alex cursed softly. The team turned, their eyes narrowing. The hyenas were coming back, but this time they were more cautious. They had smelled the blood. They had heard the roar, but now the threat was less clear. One of the men grabbed a tranquilizer rifle and loaded a dart. Sarah shook her head. "You'll hit one, not enough to stop the rest." Alex looked at the lion. "He won't survive another fight," Sarah said. "Not like this." But the lion was already stepping forward, wobbling, breathing hard, but facing the sound. He wasn't done. He couldn't fight with strength, couldn't chase, could barely stand. But still, he moved in front of them again. No teeth, no speed, no power left. Just will. And sometimes, in the wild, will is all it takes to change the ending. The sun hung lower now, casting long, golden streaks across the Kalahari sand. The air had shifted. Not just from heat or wind, but from something else. Something older than either. A silence had fallen again, but not the kind that came with fear. This one hummed with the weight of something watching. The hyenas stayed near the edges, just outside the perimeter of certainty. They paced, impatient. They knew the lion was no longer what he once had been. His roar was weak. His legs trembled. But still. He stood. They didn't understand it. Neither did Alex fully. The lion had barely survived the last 2 hours. The rescue, the cutting, the bleeding. And yet, here he was again, between danger and the ones who had shown him kindness, between the scavengers and the child who brought him water, between the past that abandoned him and the moment that dared to offer a future. The rescue team moved fast now. Sarah had loaded the final dose of antibiotics. The other men packed what they could. They knew they had minutes, maybe seconds. Tranquilizer darts could slow one hyena, but not 10, maybe more. Then it happened. A low vibration in the ground, like the earth holding its breath. The lion turned his head toward the northwest ridge. So did Alex. There, just beyond a cracked rock formation, was a shadow. It moved, fluid, purposeful. Another lion. A lioness? At first, she was nothing more than outline and dust, but when she stepped into the light, the effect was immediate. The hyenas froze, not retreated, froze. She was larger than most, shoulders high and thick with muscle. Her coat was scarred, but her eyes burned sharp and precise. There was no confusion in her steps. She wasn't hunting, she was reclaiming. The lion didn't move, but his breath caught in his throat. She didn't roar, didn't charge. She walked, each step deliberate, cutting the silence like a blade. The hyenas hissed, one growled low, but they backed away. Two scattered wide, testing. She didn't flinch. Instead, she picked one, an older female near the edge of the scrub, and lunged, not a warning, a strike. Dust exploded as her paw met bone. The hyena yelped, tumbled, and scrambled to flee. The others followed. Just like that, the threat broke. They were gone. Sarah exhaled for the first time in minutes. Alex still hadn't moved. The lioness stood still now, just a few yards away from the recovering male. The wind lifted her mane slightly, her nostrils flared, and then she came forward, not fast, not shy. She walked to him the way someone walks to something they've searched for a very long time. Her steps slowed. She sniffed the air, lowered her head, and gently pressed her nose against his. No growling, no warning signs, no dominance, just recognition. He didn't respond right away. His body was still too sore, too tired. But his eyes opened, slowly. They met hers. She circled him once, brushing her body against his. She paused at the wound where the tire had once been. Her tongue touched it, once, then again. Gentle, deliberate. Sarah stepped forward, but Alex stopped her. "Let it happen," he said quietly. "They know each other." Sarah whispered, "That's impossible." Alex shook his head. "It's not." He was already reaching for his camera, pulling up images from earlier expeditions in this region. The lioness was in them, always at the edge, never front and center. A shape in the background, a blur on the hill, a shadow behind a tree. Always near, never far, and never closer than today. He pulled up one photo dated 6 weeks ago. In the corner, her silhouette, another from 3 months before, just her ears above the ridge. Always the same general area. "She's been watching him," Alex said. "All this time." Sarah looked again. "He was never truly alone," she whispered. The lioness stepped back now, sitting beside him, guarding, waiting, her body low but alert. The male leaned against her side. It was the first time he had touched another living thing in 2 years, not in pain, not in fear, but in trust. The light shifted again, bathing the ground in amber. Naya stepped out from behind Alex, walking toward them slowly. The lioness saw her, rose slightly, but didn't advance. She simply stood. Naya didn't speak. She walked to the lion and crouched, resting her tiny hand against his massive paw. "I knew he wasn't alone," she said softly. "He was just waiting." Alex took a breath, then another. Behind him, Sarah gave final instructions to her team. Antibiotics would continue working over the next 48 hours. The wounds would need time, but he had a chance. A real one now. They wouldn't tranquilize him again. They wouldn't cage him. He would stay here in the wild, where he belonged, and he would not be alone. As they packed, Alex turned to Nia. "You know," he said, "some people wait their whole lives for someone to come back." She looked up. Did he wait too long? Alex glanced back toward the lion and lioness, two silhouettes resting side by side in the sand. "No," he said. "She came back right on time." The sky deepened into its evening shade, that strange violet color that only appeared over the Kalahari just before the stars revealed themselves. The wind softened, no longer sharp with heat, but cool enough to carry the smell of earth, blood, and something new. Freedom. The lion lay still, but not from weakness. His head rested against the lioness's side, not because he couldn't hold it up, but because, for the first time in years, he didn't have to. The rescue team had finished their work. Saline drips were done. bandages applied where the ointment couldn't reach deep enough. Sarah had given strict instructions about keeping a watch over the next few days, about avoiding unnecessary interference, about trusting nature to take over where medicine stopped. Alex knew she was right, but it was hard to walk away. The lion had become more than a creature in distress, more than a victim of waste and time. He had become a presence, a symbol of something that refused to surrender, something that had clawed its way back into the world when no one believed it still could. He watched now, camera lowered, breathing slow. The lion's eyes were closed, then open, then closed again. He hadn't slept deeply yet. Not truly, not the way the body sleeps when it knows it's safe. But something had shifted. Every few minutes, the lioness would stir. She would move closer or press her nose to his. Sometimes she would step away for a moment, scanning the horizon, and then return. Always returning. Alex turned to Sarah. Is he going to make it? She didn't answer right away. She was looking at the same thing he was. I don't know, she said finally, but I've never seen anything like this. His heart rate's still low, his breathing shallow, but it's steady. He's choosing to stay. Alex nodded. It was a strange thing to say, but it made sense. Sometimes the hardest thing for a wild animal isn't surviving injury. It's choosing to stay. They had all seen it, creatures who gave up the moment they were touched, who stopped fighting after one too many days of pain. But this lion had waited 2 years in silence. He had dragged a tire through the desert. He had fought off starvation, disease, even predators. And now he rested beside the one who had not forgotten him. That choice mattered. Naya came to stand beside him again. Her feet were dusty, and her clothes were wrinkled from the day's heat, but she stood tall. She held out her gourd. Alex poured the last of the clean water into her hands. She crouched and offered it gently to the lion again. He didn't drink, but his tongue flicked once, just once, over her fingers. It was enough. From the north, a soft thrum echoed, another vehicle approaching. The backup team. They had been radioed an hour ago. A few more volunteers, a larger medical tent, supplies, perhaps even satellite tracking equipment to monitor the lion's movements in the coming days. Sarah looked toward the sound, then turned back to the lion. "We'll tag him," she said. "Carefully. He won't feel it, but it'll help us keep eyes on him." Alex agreed. They had done all they could with hands. Now the rest was up to him. One of the rescue workers began assembling a low fence made of mesh and wood poles, just enough to keep people out and animals at a respectful distance. Not a cage, not a pen, just a line of space, enough to let recovery happen without more intrusion. The lioness rose again. She walked a slow circle around the male lion, then sat just beyond him, facing the open plain. She wasn't guarding, she was waiting. Alex lifted his camera, slowly, carefully, no flash, no sound. Through the lens, he watched. The lion stirred. Not much, just a paw first. Then the hind leg. His ribs moved differently now, no longer compressed. They expanded fully, visibly, as if air had never reached that deep before. And then he tried. Not all at once, not even gracefully, but he tried. He pushed himself to his feet. The motion was awkward, heavy, like standing inside someone else's body. His legs buckled once, then again. Then they held. The lion stood. Alex exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Sarah stood beside him. "Even if he collapses right now," she said, "that's still a miracle." But the lion didn't collapse. He turned toward the setting sun. The lioness rose too. Together, slowly, side by side, they walked. Not far, just a few steps. Then a few more. Toward the line of acacia trees at the edge of the clearing. Their pace was uneven. The lion staggered. The lioness slowed to match him. But they moved. Together. Behind them, the wind picked up dust, covering old paw prints. The same trail he had dragged himself across only hours earlier was disappearing now, replaced by new ones. Lighter, straighter. Alex turned his camera off. Naya was watching, her small hand still holding the empty gourd. "What now?" she asked. Alex smiled, just slightly. "Now," he said, "he's going home." He looked back at the fading silhouettes, and he knew. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the first time in 2 years it felt like it had a future. It was the sound of silence that Alex would remember most. Not the cries, not the saw's high-pitched scream, not the drones slicing through the air, or even the distant threat of hyenas. All of that had come and gone, loud and violent. But what stayed was this, the soft rhythm of the lion's breath, the steady patting of paws over sand, and the absence of suffering in the air. It was as if the desert itself had paused to watch. The lion walked slowly, head low but no longer dragging. Every step pressed a fresh print into the soft earth, and beside each one another smaller print followed. The lioness, steady and patient. She walked just behind his shoulder, occasionally pausing when he paused, waiting when he stumbled, and nudging him gently onward when he lingered too long. From a distance, the sight was haunting. 2 survivors, silhouetted against a sinking sun, moving toward a hill that broke the flatness of the land like a promise not yet kept. Alex lowered his camera. He had taken hundreds of photos over the years, some published in wildlife magazines, some in conservation reports, some that had never seen the light of day. But he knew, without looking, that this shot, this one of the backs of 2 lions walking into the fading gold, would be the last one he needed for a long while. He didn't need to look through glass to feel what was in front of him. This wasn't just about nature. This was about healing. A few feet away, Naya stood barefoot at the edge of the grass, her hands clasped together in front of her, gourd swinging gently against her hip. She had said very little since the lion began walking, but her eyes never left him. She had known something none of them had, that the lion hadn't been alone, that something waited for him, something just beyond the pain. As the lions neared the base of the hill, Alex turned toward Dr. Sarah. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked down at her clipboard, then at the distant forms. "We give them distance. We monitor. If he lays down and doesn't get up, we return. But if he keeps moving," Alex nodded. "If he keeps moving," she continued, "then the best thing we can do is let him." The backup team had already begun dismantling what little they had set up. The medical tent collapsed in minutes. The fencing was removed. No trackers were applied. Not yet. Sarah had made that call after seeing the lioness. He deserved a few days, she said. Time without tags, without the weight of numbers or surveillance. Time to simply exist. They would watch from a distance, and only if he failed would they return. The desert has its own way of measuring time. By the time the lions reached the crest of the hill, the sun was nearly gone. Their bodies were shadows now, golden edges glowing in the final light. And then they stopped. The lion stood still. He looked back, not at the humans, not at the tent, not at the place where he had been freed, but at something deeper, a direction, a memory, a rhythm he had once known before the tire, before the pain. He stood tall. His legs no longer trembled. He looked ahead, and together they walked over the ridge and disappeared. Alex sat down in the dirt, not out of exhaustion, but because it felt right. There were no cheers, no music, just the wind. Nia sat beside him. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a single black bead from her necklace, a gift her grandmother had given her, blessed with a prayer for strength. She pressed it into Alex's palm. "For him," she said. He nodded, fingers curling around it. Later that evening, as the stars emerged one by one in the wide African sky, Alex uploaded the first photo from his camera to his satellite connection. No edits, no filters. Just the image of a lion and a lioness walking side by side toward the unknown. He didn't add much of a caption. Just this. He waited 2 years, and today she walked him home. The photo spread. People clicked. People shared. Some cried. Some donated. Some asked what they could do. And though he didn't say it outright, Alex knew the answer. Sometimes saving an animal isn't about building fences or hospitals. Sometimes it's about stepping in when no one else will. Sometimes it's about seeing, not with your eyes, but with your heart. And sometimes it's a child with a gourd of water that changes everything. In the weeks that followed, sightings of the lions were reported by park rangers and local trackers, always together, never far from the ridge. They were no longer just stories whispered around fires. They had become proof. Proof that life, no matter how broken, could still find its way forward. Back in his cabin in Maun, Alex framed that final photo. He hung it above his desk next to the cracked lens of the drone that had helped scare off the hyenas. And every time he looked at it, he didn't see tragedy. He saw what came after, not the suffering, but the walk, the one toward the hill, the one no lion should have to make alone.